Right, ladies and gentlemen, we actually have to have a very serious conversation around the NHS, specifically around the Islamification of the NHS. But before we do, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. Anyway, let's actually get onto the video itself. And this is the news that the NHS staff were told that the best decision that they could ever make is converting to Islam. Now, before we actually address the article itself, we are reminded of some very famous cases where doctors have lost their licenses for offering to pray for patients. There have been famous cases of doctors being fired because they wore a cross to work. There are numerous cases where basically the state-sponsored religion, let us not forget that England does have a state-sponsored religion. It's called the Church of England, the official religion of the country. Now, obviously, in modern times, we've been sold a secular dream. The secular dream, obviously, being that, obviously, there's this beigeness. Remember, British identity is no longer British. What it actually means is those who come to Britain and contribute. But that means that the native population, as well as the incoming population, are treated as equal. In other words, none of the truth claims that either of them say are, well, better than the other. Everybody, it's all relative, right? And that's why a lot of the court cases have been around, well, you can't promote Christianity in the medical field. Now, keep those thoughts, because if we apply those principles, then the idea that Islam is being promoted to NHS staff is, well, hypocritical. Because in the news article, the NHS staff were given a guide by the NHS Muslim network, and this guide was written with the intention of, and I quote, pleasing God by providing support to converts to Islam, their peers and their colleagues. And it reads, for many colleagues, becoming Muslim isn't always a celebration, as many friends and relatives need time to accept the good news. Yeah, this is promotion. This is promotion of one religion against another. On top of that, NHS staff were told to dress modestly, to wear loose-fitting, modest clothing covering all parts of the body aside from the face, hands, and feet. And it's completely possible to abide by the obligations passed on to them by God in the workplace. Now, you may look at all this and say, okay, cool. What's all this got to do with the workplace? And the reality is that a lot of this guidance was promoted to NHS staff during, well, work hours. In fact, some of this guidance was given under the form of training in Bedford, Luton and Milton Keynes, with the actual Muslim network itself being sponsored by top executives of the NHS. Now, NHS South East London actually admitted that the network itself actually promotes publication to staff. In fact, they actually give them an entire 2 days off per month to do these protected activities. Now, when confronted by all of this, the NHS said that the reasons that they were allowing this is because it was vital to make sure that all staff feel comfortable and included in the NHS in order to recruit and train the most productive people possible. Yeah. But you see, the problem is that this hasn't always been the case. In fact, for the longest time, many individuals of an alternative faith have actually been excluded from the NHS if they chose to publicly demonstrate that religion. And so the relevant question actually becomes very, very easy and obvious to understand. Why is the Islamic faith and the Muslim network being given preference when it comes through to their operational functions within the NHS itself? In fact, during Ramadan, NHS England actually went out of its way to make the work environment, should we say, tolerable to many of their Islamic colleagues. This basically meant that the work environment was altered or catered towards these individuals' beliefs, so that Ramadan for them was more comfortable within the workplace rather than the work itself being fulfilled in the ordinary fashion. So this has left many individuals to ask the question, what exactly does religion and spirituality have to do with medical care? If your son's been waiting for 3 years for an operation, why are we looking at basically trying to reverse mentor staff and in order to get them to convert to Islam? Why is the primary focus of the trust, NHS Trust, to basically get Islamic converts? Shouldn't it be the treatment of individuals? Should we really be having senior executives within the NHS itself saying to their staff that converting to Islam the best decision they'll ever make? These are all questions that I'm not exactly here to answer, but I would leave you, ladies and gentlemen, to contemplate and comment on yourself. But there is a larger issue at play, and that is, why is this occurring? And the answer is actually a hell of a lot easier to understand than many individuals would like to discuss. And that is mass migration, and specifically mass migration from countries that have an Islamist bend. Now we are seeing a large amount of mass migration, and with those individuals being promoted into senior positions, ideology that wouldn't look out of place in, say, an Islamic state is creeping its way into NHS England and many other institutions. And this is leading to some worrying stats, as Rupert Lowe, MP of the Reform Party, highlights in a tweet that he made. As he said, GP appointments in London, 8% of the appointments are from British citizens. 51% of the patients require an interpreter. 72% of all sick notes are issued to individuals that do not speak English, and 92% of appointments taken by foreign nationals. This is where the NHS money is going. It's going to foreign nationals who are utilizing the service, and then when being employed by the service, are attempting to change it so that it represents a better demographic or religious trend that they would inevitably have seen in their own native land. Now, some individuals will say, don't see the problem. What's wrong with it? And on the face of it, I can understand the argument. But from a legal point, I would say, if the principle is that in the work environment, you cannot promote one religion over another, it has nothing to do with medical care, and that is why historically Christians have been unable to, do the same, then the same rules must be applied to the Islamic or the Muslim network. Allowing this to occur with an alternative religion and an alternative network leads to allegations of favoritism, which is exactly what is now being alleged by the current status quo. And this inevitably leaves everybody with a question, why? Why are we allowing this? That is a very good question. One, as I said, I don't have the answers for, but I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.